Maputo. Now, the production, provision and usage of energy is a constant conversation as Africa's demand continues to grow due to population growth and growing economies. The sector is faced with multiple challenges in their efforts to meet this growing demand. And according to projections published by the United Nations Population Report, Africa's population has grown by 30 million and will continue to grow, doubling the continental population to about 2.4 billion by 2050. We're joined now in the studio by Chiboni Evans. She's the CEO of the South African Electrotechnical Export Council. But our conversation really is about the Energy Indaba 2019, a very successful energy conversation that takes place in South Africa every year. Welcome to the agenda.
Thank you very much.
Tell us about the South African Electrotechnical Export Council. What do they do?
Well, the South African Electrotechnical Export Council is a public-private partnership between the South African Department of Trade and Industry and over 100 companies in the private sector in South Africa. And our mandate is to look at how do we internationalize the trade of South African business. So we look mainly at the business that South African companies do in the energy sector outside of South Africa, and hence our involvement in the Energy Indaba, because we're looking at what is happening in the African energy space vis-a-vis South Africa, and how do we participate in that energy development.
Every year when the Energy Indaba closes, there are proclamations about what a success it's been, the kind of conversations that have been had. And yet South Africa continues to grapple with the issue of energy provision, especially with all the machinations coming out of Eskom. Why are we not getting this right?
Well, I think in South Africa we're in a much better space than most of the African continent. In fact, we are the second largest energy producer on the continent after Egypt. We produce close to 50,000 megawatts per annum installed capacity. Egypt is just about going to its 55,000 megawatts. So
it's been said that the DRC is also doing pretty well.
The DRC have got, they are looking at putting together a program to put in installed capacity in terms of the Grand Inga project, which is something that has been discussed over years.
It's a long-term project.
It is a long-term project, and that's looking at how do they put in a hydro facility to give energy to, I think it's intended to have 40,000 megawatts in total over a period of time. But it's a very, very grandiose project, and they're hoping to do that to provide energy to the rest of the continent. So, you know, coming back to the issue around South Africa's energy problems, I don't think they're as grave as we see them in South Africa ourselves,
really?
Compared to the rest of the continent.
Okay.
When we compare to the rest of the continent, we are not doing so badly. And we do manage to ensure that we do supply energy to most people. Our access to energy in South Africa is sitting at 95%. You've got certain countries in Africa, such as South Sudan, where you've got 1% access to energy.
Absolutely.
So when you look at it in relative terms, South Africa does manage what we've got, and we have got our problems. But
I suppose from a South African perspective, it's important to separate the issues where we're talking pure energy issues, or we're talking energy plus administrative issues.
Exactly. And I think what we do also have to recognize as South Africans, and this is why Energy Indaba is such an important event, because it's been held in South Africa, is a lot of the energy players from the continent come to South Africa to understand what we have done right. So we've got an obligation to actually share the good things. I'm not saying we should shy away from what we've done wrong. We need to actually learn from that, but we also need to share where we've done things correctly, because we have done a lot correctly.
Another conversation that keeps coming up when you talk about the long-term projects that are, we've built power stations and they're now being said to be obsolete. How are we mixing up the historical provision of power with new technologies that are coming into play?
That's a very good question. In August last year, the Minister of Energy in South Africa released the Integrated Resource Plan, which talks to what are we looking at as South Africa's energy mix for the next 15 years, up until 2030. And the Minister recently announced that he will make some proclamations in February. We're hoping that he'll do that at Energy Indaba, because he's been invited there. And when you look at the energy mix that we're looking at going forward, we're moving quite a lot away from the traditional fossil fuels, because even in terms of obtaining financing for coal is a lot more difficult. And we're moving more and more into the renewable energy space. And one of the things that I think we haven't solved particularly well as South Africans, the rest of the world talks about our renewable energy independent producer power program, our REIPP program, which has been a great success.
Our energy department right now is grappling with that.
Exactly.
But in terms of bringing independent producers into the fold.
But we've done extremely well, though, in terms of the
conversation.
Exactly, viewed by the rest of the world, and in terms of the number of independent power producers we've got quite a few. So we're doing. I think we're heading in the right direction. There is a lot to be fixed. I'm not saying we should sit down on our laurels and say we're doing perfectly well, but I think we need to start looking at what have we done well and continue doing that better and trying to fix what we've not done so well.
Chiboni, it's clearly evident that conversations are taking place. Where are the hold-ups?
I think the key hold-ups, and as you say, every year at Energy Indaba, certain proclamations are made, right? So there's two things that happen at Energy Indaba. There's the policy discussions that take place. So the World Energy Council is also one of the strategic partners at Energy Indaba, and the Africa Energy Indaba is the Africa event. So what they do is they've got energy ministers from around the world, from around Africa, coming to discuss what are the key issues and challenges faced by the African energy sector. This year, we're looking specifically at what are the key game changes that are going to take place in the next 15 to 20 years in Africa. So those are things that will be discussed at ministerial and political level. Then we've got a second layer, which is where we come in as Electrotechnical Export Council, where we're looking at what are the business opportunities that are being presented because Africa is now building new energy infrastructure. And how does South Africa participate in that? From the business perspective, I think we're very happy because we get a lot of insight into what is being planned going forward, and therefore how does South African business assist the rest of the African continent to build that infrastructure. From the policy perspective, I think also policy does take a long time, and ideas do take a long time to come into fruition.
In fact, that has been one of the biggest frustration of independent power producers. From a viewer's point of view, how do we separate? Because sometimes people are confused. Let's give an example in South Africa. Are you getting your power or your energy from Eskom? Are you getting it from City Power? How is it separated in terms of energy that's provided by government and energy that comes from independent power producers? Okay, so South Africa's energy sector is basically state controlled. So Eskom it manages the generation of power, and the transmission of power is in Eskom's hand, and the distribution. So they sell the power then to our municipalities. There are other countries where they have privatized the energy sector. Nigeria is one of those. In Nigeria, for instance, the generation of power is privatized. The distribution of power is also privatized. They've got distribution companies. And then the transmission of power still sits with the state. So what we've got in South Africa is the power from Eskom gets sold to the municipalities, and then the municipalities will then on-sell it to the consumers. So you spoke about these 50 innovations that could be coming out in the Africa Energy Indaba this year. What are some of those?
Okay, I think we're looking at, especially from the SMME side, the Africa Energy Indaba and South African Electrotechnical Export Council will be hosting a number of energy sector delegates, together with the DTI has supported us in bringing our SMMEs to this event, where they will be showcasing some of the innovative solutions that they have given or brought up in the energy sector. So things like how do you manage the revenue streams that come from that are being generated, and how do those talk to consumers managing the usage of energy, some smart technology around smart metering and how those link into, for instance, things like your mobile phone and things like that. So all these sorts of new technologies that are coming about and being developed, especially by our young people, are something that we will be trying to showcase at Africa Energy Indaba this year.
All right, we're talking to Chiboni. It's such a fascinating conversation. Chiboni Evans is the CEO of the South African Electrotechnical Expert, and with your permission, shall we continue the conversation?
We can.
We're going to take a break for now. You watching the agenda. We're chasing the top of the next hour. Let's continue with this conversation when we get to the next hour.